tell you about our presenter. Dr. Leah Weiss is a researcher, lecturer, consultant, and author. She teaches compassionate leadership at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, where she created the perennially waitlisted course, Leading with Mindfulness and Compassion. As principal teacher and founding faculty member of Stanford's Compassion Cultivation program, founded by the Dalai Lama, Leah developed curriculum to train more teachers to meet a growing interest in compassion as it applies to people's work, family, community, and selves. Her first book, How We Work, Live Your Purpose, Reclaim Your Sanity, and Embrace the Daily Grind, is for sale out in the lobby. I encourage you to pick up a copy. It's a great book. Launched in March 2018, and it focuses on developing compassionate and soft skill-based leadership while also offering research-backed actionable steps toward finding purpose at home and work. Leah lives with her husband, 3 children, and the newest addition to the family, rescue Shih Tzu mix Edgar. Please join me in a really warm welcome for my friend, Leah Weiss.
So it's great to see all of you out, and I really can appreciate what it means to take an evening with kids and life and the busyness that we're all experiencing. And I think it says a lot that you're voting with your feet and showing up to have this discussion. I spent the good part of today doing some work in executive education for a network of CEOs and from across the country. And I was thinking when I was transitioning from there to here, how so much of the questions that I'm asking in my own parenting are connecting back and forth what I'm seeing in the research and the emerging trends in leadership. So what I'd like to share with you tonight is some of the foundations that I hope that you will find valuable for yourselves as parents and human beings, and that you can then transmit to your children in the ways that make sense to you. And part of what I'm going to talk about is the case for, the business case even for, why do these soft skills matter? Like, yes, we all want our kids to be good human beings and contribute to the world, and we're also tasked to make sure that they're prepared, and that's something that every parent takes seriously. So I'm going to start from actually the start and asking and answering some of these questions about why is this, from a very practical, bottom line perspective, something that we want to invest our resources and our children in to prepare them, and then build off of that into the how. So that's our journey for the evening. So it comes back, I think, in some ways to what is our basic sense of what we're preparing our children for. Do we have an idea that they're going to be facing a version of professionalism when they go to interview for their first job? Are they going to be prepared to be articulate and their best self and the right top choice when they're meeting a group like this? Is that what professional means to us? Or do we think of it, I don't know if you saw the BBC turned meme this last year of the anchor who was doing an interview from home office, and the toddler wanders in and he's trying to field it. And then the follow-on meme of the mom anchor in the same situation who goes through feeding the child, cooking a turkey, helping her husband find a sock that's missing, and then quite literally diffusing a bomb, all while being incredibly articulate. Is that the version of professionalism that we're preparing our children for? It's a different skill set, right? So one thing we know about the demands of 21st century leadership, who our children are going to need to grow up to be, adaptive, able to think literally on their feet. They're going to be faced with immense to-do lists and prioritizing, and as some people are calling it, the attentional economy is going to be crucial, because the ability to make decisions, sift through vast amounts of information, and know what the right priority is, not just for themselves but their teams, that's what we're expecting people to be able to do. Technical skills, and you may ask yourself, why would there be a course in compassionate leadership at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and why on earth would that be a popular course? I think part of the reason is that people are seeing, if you have 2 years to get your MBA, the skills you're gonna walk away with, if you spend all of your time on technical skills, they will literally be obsolete by the time you hit the job market again. So the question is, how do you learn how to learn? How do you think about solving problems, and how do you enlist people to your perspective? All of this also happening in a time where it's not just our schools, but our workplaces that our children are going to grow up and be a part of. The rates of inclivity, which is the research term for workplace rudeness, all the way from one end of microaggressions to full-on bullying and violence on the other, all of this is on the rise. So we need to prepare our children not just to be nice people, but to be prepared to navigate and try to create more positive cultures in the midst of this kind of challenge. And it's not that people want to be, this is my take on it, and I think is a fair read of the research, people are experiencing immense amounts of stress. And that does not bring out the best behavior in us. So we need to know and understand what is that going to look like for preparing our children. So what I want to share with you is the framework that I've put together, what I consider to be the critical emotional intelligence competencies. First is clarity and purpose as an individual, but also in being able to understand how that shows up in the choices we make, all the way from what are the courses we select when the kids are old enough to make those choices, to the internships they pick. How does purpose play a role in their decision-making process so that they are learning and growing in directions that are valuable to them? Self-compassion and compassion, I'm going to talk more about tonight as a critical place for our kids to develop competencies. And the framework that I'm presenting to you, by the way, is all predicated on the fact that the most important thing, if we want to recruit our kids to become better at something, we have to be good at it ourselves. The modeling is the number one way. There's no shortcut around that. So each of those sections that I'm going to be preparing and sharing with you tonight, I'm going to ask you to reflect on where's your child with this and where are you with this? Because they are not unrelated questions in many cases. So to give you a sense of where my work is coming from, the academic background, I was trained at Stanford, I studied history, my doctorate's in education and Buddhist studies. I've spent a lot of time doing long meditation retreats and then translating back into the research. How do you take a core idea like compassion and bring it into an intervention, into a setting that has nothing to do with a retreat setting? And I'm literally the least likely person to be teaching at the business school at Stanford, by the way. But through a series of coincidences, we know, I'm sure you've all heard a lot of work around mindfulness and compassion coming out, not just in the sort of fuzzy space, but CEOs of major companies here in Silicon Valley talking about it as a value that they will be hiring against. We teach a case in my business school class about the hiring methods for compassion. How do you demonstrate that you have this as a value? You have to have it, but how do you show when you're being asked to make decisions? So very quickly, to give you the top level business case, which I promised you, and then we'll build on there to the tools and interventions. This is not a new idea. Even though mindfulness is getting a lot of media these days, back in the 70s, the whole idea of emotional intelligence started getting a lot of focus, and as you, I'm sure, know, that Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence sort of consolidated the movement and the research. And it includes a whole set of skills that basically, they're not technical skills, and it wasn't quite clear how do you bucket them. They kind of all went under this category of emotional intelligence. And if you ask recruiters, if you ask organizations what they most value, this is some of the broad criteria that they'll look at. So you need to be organized, you need to work well with others, people are working longer and longer hours, the ability to actually have that friendly personality, or at least not a rancid personality, becomes non-trivial. Otherwise, you will get selected out of projects, out of opportunities. So this literally, the most interesting thing, and I think salient for us to keep in mind as parents, is our kids will get their first opportunities based on their technical competencies. That is likely the case. They will become bottlenecked in their growth, not just professionally, but personally. And this is what the research shows. If you get a technical degree, you can get into the organization, but very quickly you hit a ceiling, and the ceiling relates to emotional intelligence. From a corporate perspective, the reason mindfulness is now a $1.1 billion industry. Why are companies spending $1.1 billion a year to train in it? It's not just because everybody is feeling nice all of a sudden. It's for these outcomes. Retention, because turnover costs a lot. I'm not going to get into all the business of this, but you can see sales and profits. People who are rude don't sell well, right? Some of this is just common sense. But we can't presume, and increasingly our young people, as they're spending more and more time on technology, are not necessarily, not to blame technology, but there is an association, and narcissism rates are on the rise. We need to not assume that they have the interpersonal skills, and we need to proactively train in them. And guess what? These skills can be trained, and the top universities are doing it. Harvard and Stanford and MIT and Yale, these are the most popular classes. If you saw the New York Times a few weeks ago, it was profiling the Yale most popular class, which is about well-being and happiness. So some of the key areas of development that I've organized into the work that I teach are based on the foundations. I guess this font is showing up a little light, but that's okay, we'll make do. The foundational piece is on purpose, and I spoke a little bit about that, and also on mindfulness. And by mindfulness, I don't mean a bunch of woo. As one of my students asked me the first day of my first course at GSB, excuse me, Professor Weiss from the back row, is this gonna be one of those hippie BS things? Because if so, I'm out of here. It's still drop ad. No, it's not. It's actually the ability to hone your attention where it needs to be, which is the basis of being able to prioritize, right? And then if we want to look at what does it mean to be able to deal with ourselves, when people have no tolerance, everybody talks about fail fast in Silicon Valley. But our young people are increasingly fragile and have a real difficulty with receiving negative feedback, with accepting the kind of challenge that comes with saying, this isn't working, or I made a mistake, let's turn this around and make it a teachable moment. That requires a set of skills that engage with self-criticism and engage with their relationship with themselves, and then clearly the relationship with others at work and beyond. So now, diving in to look at purpose a little more directly, a couple of observations I want to share with you. One is, in this era of distraction, it becomes increasingly difficult to place our attention where we want it to be. And because of this, it becomes difficult to have perspective, to know what matters, and to make choices with our time accordingly. So to share with you the definition of purpose, this comes from positive psychology pioneer Barb Fredrickson, who is trained here at Stanford. Look at this definition with me. She talks about purpose as a far-reaching and steady goal. So it's not something you're going to check off your to-do list today or tomorrow. It's something personally meaningful. So if somebody's purpose doesn't actually relate to their values, it's not going to function. And then it has to be self-transcending. It has to be bigger than self. And this is consistent with the research that finances alone do not lead to happiness, or they don't motivate the long-term success. And one of the really interesting things I want you to recognize about purpose is this is a key ingredient for resilience. This is what that far-reaching goal, that thing that's bigger than just me, that helps orient our efforts in such a way that we can really continue. And I think the Holocaust survivor, Viktor Frankl, as he put it in Man's Search for Meaning, really captures the essence of why this is the case. Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. So purpose gets us through the challenging periods which are inevitable in life. So one of the key points about purpose that is crucial to keep in mind is that there's three mindsets we can have about how we're engaging with our work and how we are engaging with the activities before us. And if we have kids in high school and we're preparing them to go off to college, we need to be thinking about what is their perspective on the trajectory ahead. So if they see everything as this is a path to eventually like having a life where I trade time for money, this is going to be a really unproductive, counterproductive use of their precious time in university. If they see that they have a career ahead of them, they have goals that they're building the foundations for and moving towards, that will motivate them towards certain experiences that they'll get skills, they'll get traction. If they see an option for a purposeful, for a calling-based kind of life, they will get lit up and they will make all sorts of things happen. And you can tell immediately the difference between a person who has a perspective on their life and their work that they can make a real impact, how they relate with the challenges that they experience. This is just, okay, gotcha. Okay, so what I want to summarize for you in terms of the research is that this isn't just a philosophical orientation. This isn't just something that an organization cares about. This also comes back down to our biological health. And there's all kinds of impacts that having a strong sense of purpose have on us, ranging from our ability to have metabolize stress and deal with cortisol, like when your slide deck stops working when you're giving a talk. It helps you to sleep at night. It helps you to have a lower risk of mortality, Alzheimer's disease. There's all kinds of very tangible benefits in addition to the mental, I feel better when I have a strong sense of purpose. So there's a number of different ways we can cultivate interventions that increase a sense of purpose, starting all the way from adolescence, that goes through adult life. And one of the things that is really crucial to developing a sense of purpose is to be clear on values, is to have an active connection between our values and how we're spending our time. So those who have a why, if you have a why, then you get through that challenging math class in a way that is different than the people without the context, right? So what I want to encourage you to do is turn to a neighbor. It might be someone you came here with, it might be a stranger, and I want you to do a quick check-in with them. Where do you think your kid is with respect to purpose? And where do you think you are with respect to purpose? Just a brief check-in. Compassion, or the difficult feedback that's needed to give version of compassion that helps create more resilient people in the context of life, in the bumps in the road. So compassion, in terms of a definition, it's recognizing suffering in the people around us and having the ability to choose to lean in and try to alleviate that suffering. And it's based on this mindset of recognizing that in some fundamental way, the person who is having the suffering is just like me, right? There may be all kinds of details that are different about them, but in some fundamental way, there's this common piece just like me. They want to be well. They don't want to be sick. They don't. If they're acting like a jerk, probably something's going on. All of those kinds of perspectives and the mental flexibility that goes behind our ability to have them and apply them when we are being challenged, that's when the emotional intelligence part of the leadership development and just the human value development comes in. Compassion is not pity. It is not the same as looking down on the person. It's not crying along with them. It's not heroism. It's not being naive, and it's not being a doormat. And this is something we've been looking at Stanford. How do you cultivate? What are the conditions for the individual and the environment that support compassionate leadership and inhibit it? Jeff Weiner, CEO of LinkedIn, has a lot to say about this by embracing compassion as a core corporate value. And I think that this statement here has a lot to show us. That it's a core objective. It's something that we need, particularly when we're in a tense situation. So feeling compassionate and nice and helping someone when we agree with them or they're easy to like is a very different skill set than can we suspend judgment long enough to hear the merits of another person's perspective, take it in, and have it inform our perspective. That is a critical competency that we actually can train in. And we know through a number of really interesting biometrics that compassion has a real impact on our bodies physiologically, looking at things ranging from gene expression to our neural networking using the fMRI, vagal tone, the vagus nerve that runs through the body. Dr. Keltner, who directs the Greater Good Science Center at Berkeley, he talks about the vagus nerve being the place that this compassion capacity lives in the body. It's very interesting work, and it also impacts our ability to relate to stress. So at its core, and this is drawing on the work of Dr. Keltner, and if you want to see a fuller argument about this, his book, Born to Be Good, distills what I'm about to tell you about. So evolution, even though many of us learned in high school, and our kids may well be learning here, that it's about survival of the fittest and competition, there's another side to the story from Darwin. And these are Darwin's own words, that sympathy will give us competitive advantage. Sympathy will create flourishing. That's a very different point of view than what I learned about Darwin in high school. I don't know about the rest of you and what your children are learning. And you may say, okay, this is all philosophical stuff, but it comes back to the very baseline perspectives we have about what we expect of our behavior, of our leadership, of our organizations. And we have dual drives as people. We can be in environments that bring out the worst of us. Think the Zimbardo prison experiments, right? You're put in a condition where normal Stanford undergrads are positioned as prison guards, and they administer doses of electricity that are so high they would kill other normal Stanford undergrads. It shows you the environment can be extremely influential, more than we recognize. And we know that there's potential for all kinds of pro-social altruistic behavior, and Dr. Zimbardo's more recent research is really interestingly the opposite. It's about the heroic imagination project. It's about what creates the whistleblower, what creates the person who can speak out despite a condition that would influence them to go along with. One of the key capacities that compassion relates to, if you want to look at the research and the neuroscience of this, is, it's showing up late, but basically we have 3 different emotion regulation systems. We have a drive system where we go for the dopamine hit, and that can be through accomplishing things and getting recognition and checking them, doing really well on the SATs, or getting that job, or getting that reward, or it can also play out in substance abuse. There's also a big piece of this, it's the threat system, that we can be stuck in our fight or flight response if we're in an environment where we're in heightened stress over time. Then there's this third system that many people lose access to starting in adolescence, which is the calming, soothing system. That's what allows us to rest. That's what allows us to have the downtime so that we can continue to learn and grow. We are not wired to be upregulated with chronic stress all the time. We need to have this ability to access the calming system, and that's something that we actually can learn, and there's a ton of research supporting the ways in which we get better and better at doing that. So again, for us, I think the takeaway becomes, are we modeling this? Do we have access to this calming system? Are we always running around frenetically in drive or threat and modeling that as the way to be for our kids? Or do we have rituals and behaviors that we're showing them and teaching them and making sure they are equipped with before they leave the home? Because there's nothing harder than seeing first-year Stanford students who have been the best of the best, but eventually, whether it's in college or graduate school or jobs, we level up until we're surrounded with peers. And if we don't have the ability to make sense of that and to learn with and collaborate from other people, we're going to be on a pretty bad trajectory. This is a key framework. Can we switch over to the board up there, because this is not moving forward? So the question that I want to ask you now, to turn to a neighbor and briefly check in about, how do you think your kid is doing with these 3 systems? Do you think they have the ability to self-soothe? Is that something that is part of their daily routine? Or is this something that is absent? And what about for you? Where are you with these 3 systems of the drive, threat, and calming or soothing system? So just do a brief check-in with someone that you came with, or meet a new friend. So to summarize in terms of compassion, if you want to break it down into some of the competencies we need to be able to recognize suffering around us. That means that we're not distracted. That means that we then can move to the next step of making the appraisal that there's some common humanity here where that person is just like me. You can find that bridge to then be able to see how you can help, how you have the resources and the capacity to help. So I want to move to the third of the competencies that I mentioned is a crucial one, and this is self-compassion. So interestingly, the model that I use in my book and to describe why self-compassion matters is an old, thousands of years old Buddhist traditional story about the multiple arrows. So life gives us opportunities to experience suffering all the time, small and large, mistakes we make, feedback that we get, illness, all kinds of things. Those are the first arrow in this metaphor. Then there's the follow-on arrows, where we start ruminating and getting stuck and thinking about it and not knowing how to move forward and basically debilitating ourselves. So the question I want to ask you is a ludicrous question, but what if instead of people being embroiled in self-criticism, they were embroiled in concern, in inner dialogue around what they're doing well, what their strengths are? If you've used a strengths finder at work, what if we were ruminating about what we can contribute? Yeah, that might seem ridiculous, because if we were ruminating about strengths, wouldn't that block our fundamental driver for our excellence, right? Isn't the thing that propels our being great at whatever it is that we're great at because we hold ourselves to that higher level of accountability than everyone else? The self-criticism is perceived to be the driver for many of us and for many of our children. That's what the message that they're internalizing. But actually, if you look at the research, it's the opposite. A self-critical mind is a threat-focused mind. So it's experienced by the person the same way that if you were screaming at me all day long, oh, you're such an idiot, I can't believe you did that again, I wouldn't be able to get a lot of work done. People who are stuck in these cycles of self-criticism are less productive, is the bottom line. And all self-criticism associated with all of these outcomes, depression, anxiety, procrastination, the version of perfectionism that means that you can't work because nothing's good enough. You can't share out a working product, get feedback about it, and improve it. So all of these kind of challenges build on the spiral of self-criticism. And to look at this from the other side, it relates back to three fundamental skills. So we need, for self-criticism, to have mindfulness. That means we need to actually notice in the moment, I'm experiencing anxiety, I'm experiencing self-criticism, I'm experiencing X, rather than just jumping to suppression, which leads to terrible physical and mental health outcomes. It means that we can see the common humanity in our own struggle and relate it to other people, so we are coachable. We can go out and solicit support as we need to. And then third, that we have this attitude, and I know this seems cheesy, but it is important, it is crucial, of self-kindness. Can we, as I put it with my students, coach ourselves? Can we work ourselves through the problem instead of derailing into unhelpful pile-on arrows? And the interesting thing is this is all highly learnable. It's learnable through techniques that center on contemplative practice. It's also learnable through techniques that focus on just learning these three skills. So one of the interventions that I love, it's a quick intervention. You write a letter when you're having a problem. You can take this home, do it yourself, or have your kids do it. They're obsessing with a mistake they made, right? Or they got a test score that wasn't what they hoped for. The first paragraph, they just write out all the description of what they're feeling, the mindfulness of what they're experiencing. The second paragraph, it's all about what the common humanity of the situation. Every high schooler in this country, in any country at this point, who's in an academic system is going to be up against these pressures. That is part and parcel of being in a competitive global world. And then that third part, getting them, teaching them, please teach them to coach themselves, because otherwise they get to college and they spiral out as soon as they get their first B, and they don't know how to make sense of it. So you can help them. If you can't get them to write the letter, I mean, I get it. My oldest is 8, so like I can still get her to do all sorts of wacky things I'm sure in 5 years from now she won't do. But you can talk them through it. You can bring these 3 steps home when they're having a problem and use that with them. The future self research, if you want to support them in making better decisions, the ability to picture the outcomes in the future and how that future version of ourself is going to receive the choices we make today, it improves decision making across a number of axes, including financial decision making, risk behavior. So we can inculcate in our discussions with our kids a connection for them between the self that they are today in formation with the self that they're going to be in 5 years, and 10 years, and 15 years. If they can make that strong connection, factor that person that they want to become into the choices they're making today, it will again make them more resilient. And self-compassion is not all these things that I know come to mind for me when I hear the term. I hate the term, quite honestly. It's not feeling sorry for yourself, it's not indulging yourself, and it's also not the same as self-esteem in that, interestingly, this research on self-compassion came out of Dr. Kristin Neff's. She was a doctoral student at Berkeley studying self-esteem. And she writes about this in her book. If you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend her book after you read my book. No, I'm just kidding. It's about self-compassion, and she's doing research, and what she's finding is self-esteem is actually a really faulty construct. And oh my God, 2 decades of kids were raised with it, and that's part of why she talks about the narcissism rates being through the roof and going up and up, because when we raise our kids to have a sense of self that is based on self-esteem, when they fail, when they make a mistake, when they fall flat on their face, which they will do, that's not going to be there for them, because self-esteem is based on I'm better than, I'm awesome. So what do I do when I fall on my face and I'm not awesome and I'm not better than anyone because I just blew it? What do you turn to there? Dr. Neff's argument was self-compassion. And she started testing this construct, and it basically went from non-existent to like blowing up in the field in all kinds of research areas, from young adults through the lifespan, looking at performance, all the kind of research I was summarizing for you. So it's important that we understand the difference between narcissism and the need for positive feedback, that the need for self-esteem based identity, versus recognizing our strengths and recognizing that we all fail. That's part of what makes us human, and we can develop the growth mindset. I really see self-compassion as the foundation for a growth mindset. Because how can our children be willing to encounter and learn from failure if they can't tolerate discomfort? So the self-esteem perspective, it is linked with bullying, it is linked with narcissism, it is gone when we need it the most. So this is part of why we get trained. When my kids entered Bang at 2, I had to relearn the way I was speaking to them, because you don't praise performance, you praise process. But if you want to trace that all back, what you're really trying to teach your kid is you are fundamentally good. And you will make mistakes, but that doesn't undermine your worth. And if you can really communicate that to them, then you're creating an opportunity for them to move out in the world and be ready for challenges. So we don't have to have an awesome Doogie Howser point of view about ourselves, but we can have a realistic, I don't know what's going on. So how do we implement self-compassion? So we need to recognize when we start throwing the second arrows, right? And that becomes a skill set of just us ourselves. I mean, I'm a researcher in this stuff, and I catch myself daily modeling, not exactly aligned with the message. It's deeply ingrained, is the point I'm making. So we can't expect this of our kids if we don't start calling out. And I think the way that we can do that as parents is not that all of a sudden you're going to go home and eradicate negative self-talk or out loud self-talk in front of your kid, but when you catch yourself doing that, then you can make that a discussion point to say, you know what, I just responded this way about some mistake I made. I took you to the birthday party an hour late because it was in my calendar wrong. So instead of I'm so sorry, I'm so embarrassed, blah, 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 it can be, when you start down that road, it can become a discussion point. And we need to consider what action is of service to the situation, not get stuck in the loop of ruminating. And then we need to commit our attention accordingly. So once we've decided I'm throwing second arrows, what do I need to do to make this situation right? Is there someone that needs to be apologized to? Is there a next step I can take to improve the situation? We do that. And if you want to know, very practically speaking, here's some of the comparisons you can make. I don't know why. Okay, there we go. Technology drama. So the desire to improve. How do you road test? So my students would come to me and say, like, okay, how do I road test when I'm doing the self-critical negative, or when I'm learning in a way that is debriefing myself from a situation and an error, so I'm getting the learning out of it. So here are some of the signposts for you. If you see that you're focusing on the desire to improve, if you're focusing on growth and enhancement, if it's forward-looking, what can I learn? How can I fix? How can I repair? If it's given with encouragement, coaching, kindness, if it's building on the positives, then that's a good sign that this is like fail fast, learn from growth, all that stuff. If it's the other side, if it's ruminating and recycling and condemning and punishing and backwards looking, or if it's given with anger and frustration and contempt, if it's focusing on the deficits, then it's a good bet that you're in this shame-based kind of cycle. And we do that as parents with our kids, right? It can maybe be a habit when they do something that we are frustrated with. What is our response to them? And Dr. Neff talks about that being at the core of our children's ability to access self-compassion, the messaging we give them when we are disappointed, how we give that message. Can we stay on the left? Or can we catch ourselves when we veer to the right and call a timeout and move over to this other side? So I want to invite you now for the last time to turn to a neighbor. How is your kid doing with self-compassion? What do they do when they make a mistake? What's their responding behavior? And where are you at with this? Is this a skill set you need to develop as well? Maybe you can work on it together. So let's continue the conversation, but as a bigger group now. So what I've presented you with is basically the case for why emotional intelligence, why soft skills matter, and 3 key facets of it that have probably had less of a strong marketing campaign than some of the others you may have heard about. And at the root of all of these is mindfulness. Mindfulness is the basis for ability to live a purposeful life. It's part of the compassion. Remember, that ability to recognize what's going on in other people. Empathic accuracy, to be able to understand what they're experiencing and read it correctly. And it's also an important part of self-compassion. And there's such interesting research happening right down the street here at Stanford about, in the psychology department, we have the best faculty around emotions and emotion regulation and what works and what doesn't work. And I can tell you that the bottom line is that suppression is bad news. It's bad news for us, for our physical health, for our productivity, self-criticism and suppression. We need to have the capacity to be mindful, to use the intentional use of attention, to purposefully and be able to place what we're focusing on in a way that's consistent with our goals, and to recognize the distractions that pull us away over and over again. That's the muscle that we develop. That's leveraging neuroplasticity when we cultivate the capacity for mindfulness as the foundation and these other core competencies. So I would love to open it up to discuss with you, what are your reactions to what you're seeing here, to this framework? How does this relate in your role as a parent with your kids? How does this relate with you? How does this relate with the curriculum you see your kids going through here? Is this part of what they're learning? Is this part of what's being emphasized? It's going to come back in the college interview process, I can tell you that. It's going to come back again and again. So it's something that's got to be in place. And we're increasingly getting the upshot of the research that I'm presenting to you is a lot of this is then going into industry and being used to sort out who are the people who have emotional intelligence and not. So we're going to be getting ever more sophisticated at being able to answer that question. So how are we doing to prepare our kids to meet that task? And I think it's ultimately a great thing, but it's a different competency to demonstrate in an interview than a skill set of technical competencies. So how is this landing with you? And skeptics are welcome. I am very happy to engage in some lively debate with you. If any of you have made it through to this point and you're feeling super critical of this, bring it up. Let's talk about it. What does that raise for you? This actually is a polarizing issue for many reasons. So I think I welcome having a discussion about that fact. Where the resources go in our kids' education? Should it just be focusing on their technical skills, or should we be building this in? That's up for debate.